Facebook broadcast. Is the audio clear?
Mga karanasan ng pagtanggol at paglaban, nasa salin lahi, pinamana at niraan. Mga pamanang inukit sa bawat pahina, naging bahagi ng bawat gawi at kultura. Mga lupain inaruga at pinagyaman ng karunungan mula sa ninuno. Subalit ang tadhana na ba ay nalangadyan? Bakit may buwitring namimiestra? Ang kinyaman mo'y ginagawang tubo, takam na takam nilang pinagsusubok. Usog na nga'y hindi pa nakontento, ang mga gahaman, mga jablo, na kahit ang kultura ang sagrado, nilapastangan, ginawang negosyo. Subalit itinuro na ng iyong karanasan, kung may mang-aapi at lalapastangan, wala nang ang ibang paraan, kundi ang magbangon, magtanggol, lumaban. Yun sa puso ng mayamang kagubatan, sumisibol ang makulat, malayang kamalayaan, katutubot, makauring sandatang iyong tangan, nangangalit, naghuhumiyaw. Subalit itinuro na ng iyong karanasan, kung may mang-aapi at lalapastangan, wala nang ang ibang paraan, kundi ang magbangon, magtanggol, lumaban.
Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA is the process or study which predicts the effect of a proposed industrial or infrastructural project on the environment. It falls under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. EIA covers projects such as mining of coal or other minerals, infrastructure development, thermal, nuclear and hydropower projects, real estate and other industrial projects. It prevents the proposed activity or project from being approved without proper oversight or taking adverse consequences into account. It compares various alternatives for a project and identifies the one which represents the best combination of economic and environmental costs and benefits. EIA is a formal process in many countries and is currently practiced in more than 100 countries. India notified its first EIA norms in 1994. A new draft was introduced in 2020 but has been widely criticized for its problematic changes in rules. The 2020 draft of EIA allows post facto clearance. It means any project that comes up without environment safeguards or clearances could carry out their operation. In the new EIA draft, there is a list of projects exempted from the assessment. These include any project the government categorizes as strategic. Once a project is considered as strategic, then no information related to such project shall be placed in the public domain. All inland waterways and national highway projects have also been excluded from the public consultation. There is a provision that exempts construction projects of up to 1,50,000 square meters from EIA and public consultation. According to the new draft, violations can only be reported by a government representative or the project proponent and not citizens. Any environmental impact assessment is presented for a public hearing. It gives the public a chance to understand the project and its whole process. Inadequate time for public consultation questions the transparency and credibility of the assessment process. But the new draft cuts down the current 30 days for public consultation to 20 days. Experts say most of the provisions in the new draft of EIA proves to be a regressive departure from the earlier version. Recent incidents such as the gas leak at the LG polymer plant in Visakhapatnam and the blowout and fire at the Oil India Limited in Assam are some of the examples that points out the importance of EIA in our country.
into illegal coal mining has brought sharp focus to the alleged collusion between the state and actors involved in illegal mining. The Lokayukta had observed how despite multiple bans and directives from various bodies, including the NGT and Supreme Court, mining has continued in an unregulated and illegal manner. Talking to DD News, Patricia Mukhim, activist and senior journalist, explains how coal mining became such an intractable problem.
Right from 2014, when some coal miners were trapped in the mines of Garu Hills, suddenly there was an order for an inquiry. But of course, those people remained inside. They've been dead there for a long time. So that was then the National Green Tribunal ordered the closure of all mines and considered that illegal mining. And they said that they told the state government that you should come up with a mining policy, comprehensive, meaning all minerals. That is something that the state government hasn't been able to come up with, and therefore now coal is illegally mined.
Agnes Kashieng is an activist who felt the full wrath of those involved in illegal mining. In November 2018, she was viciously attacked by a mob when she was probing illegal mining activities in East GMT Hills. Barely escaping the attack alive, she mentions how the state should act in a decisive manner if this problem is to be resolved. She blames deep-seated corruption in many offices for illegal mining continuing unabated.
In the whole world, crime will go down if people in power acts. But if you don't act, if you allow that illegality to continue, naturally they feel so emboldened now.
Greetings of solidarity. Welcome to Virus of Plunder, Northeast India in Defense of Land and Resources, an online discussion about the concerns of the peoples, especially indigenous peoples of Northeast India, on corporate and government development projects and its policies and program. I'm your host, DJ, today. My name is Atama Katama. I'm from the International League of People's Struggle of Malaysia. I'm also part of ILPS Commission 10, and I am the international representative of a sub-regional indigenous peoples organization of Borneo called the Dayak International Organization. Welcome to our webinar today. Ladies and gentlemen, This webinar is brought to you by International League of People Struggle, ILPS, Commission 10, Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, IPM-SDL, the Center for Research and Advocacy of Manipur, or CRAM, Youth's Forum for Protection of Human Rights, or YFPHR, with the Minority Rights Group International, CASI, Students Union, ILPS Commission 19, Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders, APNED, and the Center for Environmental Concerns of Philippines, CEC. Dear friends, we are also broadcasting live on Facebook page of ILPS Commission 10, the Facebook pages of IPMSDL, APNED, CEC, YFPHR, CRAM, and many other Facebook pages, which is broadcasting this feed right now. And if you would like to share this feed, kindly do so from your Facebook Live. All you have to do is click Start Watch Party, and the world will join us in this webinar. We are also live tweeting, so don't forget to use our hashtags. Hashtag Stand for Northeast, hashtag Defend IP Rights, hashtag Defend Ancestral Lands. Friends, here are a few reminders to our speakers and our respondents and reactors. Please be advised that our meeting today is being recorded. To our audience and participants here in Zoom, please keep your audio on mute and video disabled. Please type in your name, country, and affiliation so we can address you properly. We will be strictly monitoring our participants' interactions and will remove them if unnecessary. For questions, inputs, and comments, please use the chat box in the Zoom room or comment in the ILPS Commission 10 Facebook comment section. We will try to accommodate all your inputs if we still have time. And as you know, time is not always on our side, and I think it's time that we are all set. So let's straight get into it right away. To warmly welcome us, here's the International Officer of CATRIBU, which is the Alliance of Indigenous Peoples and Organizations in the Philippines, ILPS Commission 10, and the Global Coordinator of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, to give us a welcoming address and guide us into today's webinar. Please welcome, in the Philippines, Beverly Sakongan Longit. Over to you, Beverly.
Thank you, Atama. Thank you very much. Welcome to all our participants and speakers to this second webinar on Northeast India entitled The Virus of Plunder, organized as mentioned earlier by the International League of People Struggles, ILPS Commission number 10. The first webinar that we had was a successful webinar last April 3, entitled A Journey to the North, to an introduction about Northeast India, its history, land, and people. A beautiful land, rich with biodiversity and natural resources, and made vibrant by culturally diverse peoples. But unfortunately, it is also a land with many conflicts, a situation and land unknown to many. I think it's common among our friends and comrades from the Northeast that when they introduce themselves that they're from Nagaland, they're from Assam, they're from Manipur, people would wonder like, where is Assam, where is Nagaland, and where is Manipur? It is for this reason, among others, that the ILPS Commission 10 dissolved last year to facilitate further discussions, studies, and campaigns on issues of indigenous peoples and national minorities. Our discussion today will focus on the resource plunder affecting the indigenous peoples and communities in 3 states in Northeast India, Manipur, Assam, and Meghalaya, highlighting the repression and state terrorism and other enabling policies and underlying agendas that are linked with the entry of destructive corporate and government-sponsored projects in these states. We shall feature the other states in future online events to complete the narrative of the historical struggles for self-determination of the indigenous peoples, minorities, and tribes in the 8 Northeast states. And we are happy to announce today that the International League of People's Struggles, ILPS, the biggest anti-imperialist and democratic formation, recently declared November as Solidarity Month for India. So we look forward to more discussions on the situation, struggles, and aspirations of the peoples of India, especially of the indigenous peoples. The ILPS Commission 10 is one of the 20 working groups of the ILPS. It works on the rights of indigenous peoples, national minorities, oppressed nationalities, and nations for self-determination and decolonization. It works against discrimination, racism, national oppression perpetrated by imperialism and local reaction. The IPMSDL, the International IPMSDL, hosts and serves as the volunteer secretariat of the Commission. So we look forward for an interesting and fruitful discussion and ways forward in solidarity with the peoples of the Northeast. Yamna Tagachari, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that was Beverly Longid Sakungan, all the way from the Philippines. Thank you for your welcoming message. Beverly is from the IPMSDL, Katribu ILPS Commission 10 as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's help you start our journey into Northeast India and understand its continual challenges in the face of aggressive private and state development projects. First, let's go to Assam. For our first speaker, we have Mr. Tirtha Prasad Saika from Assam. He is the Joint Director of Northeast Affected Area Development Society, or NE, humanitarian relief and disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and grassroots sustainable development efforts. Over to you, Mr. Tirtha Prasad Saika. Mr. Tirtha Prasad will be presenting a PowerPoint presentation for you.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, you are, and you are
Yes.
live now, Tirtha Prasad. Over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Atama Katama, for introducing me in this platform of webinar. I'm very much privileged and honored to be part of this webinar hosted by International Indigenous People Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, as well as International League of People Struggle Commission 10, titled Virus of Plunder. And thanks to ILPS Commission 10 for providing this opportunity to speak from the state of Assam and from this region. Welcome everyone. I have prepared a short presentation where I'm mostly focusing on 2 of the major issues that is pertaining our state. That is the battle over coal and oil in Assam. So this year, Assam is facing a lot of problems, including the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the rampant flood situation, Along with that, the battle over coal and oil, that was these both two issues were very, very interesting for the indigenous peoples. So with this presentation, I'll be focusing in all those areas. The title of the presentation here, here I would like to go. It is the development, aggression, destructive investment, and depressing reality on people. I would like to start with Assam is a state of northeastern India situated at the south of eastern Himalayan region along the Brahmaputra and Barak river valleys. The region is blessed with all forms of resources: water, minerals, forest, land, biodiversity hotspot, wildlife, etc., etc. Assam is India's gateway to the northeast and act as a vital link for trade with Southeast Asian countries. It is well connected by rail, road, port, and airports, which is turning the state into a logistic hub, into the new gateway of India to the Southeast Asia in accordance with ACT's policy that is projected in our region. In our state, there is different aggressive development push and extractive projects. There are a lot of proposed large dams initiatives that are being taken in the upstream of Himalaya, in the upstream of Brahmaputra river basin and other major river basins. There is illegal coal mining, there is oil exploration, hydrocarbon exploration, and different other destructive projects that are proposed and going on as part of the ACT's policy. And those are really affecting the indigenous peoples, and peoples are just losing its land identity and control of our natural resources. There is also infiltration of illegal migrant, and because of that, the shrinking of space in terms of land and livelihood is very common in different parts of the state.
Tirtha, excuse me, Tirtha, can you share again your PowerPoint? We can't see it yet. Can you try to share the PowerPoint again? Sorry, thank you.
Okay. Hi, Paul, is it okay now?
No, we can't see it yet.
Is it all right now? I have shared twice. Is it okay?
Not yet. Maybe I will share it from my end. Is it okay? Okay.
I have revised the presentation. Sorry. Is it okay? Can I again resume my presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chisa Prasad, please continue your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. We can see it now.
Okay, you can see it now.
Yeah, we can see it now, Tirtha. You can do it. Oh, yeah, that's okay.
Okay, is it okay now?
Yes. Okay. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. Apology for the inconvenience and technical challenge. The state is also very highly erosion and different other natural calamities like landslide. And it is and Assam and Northeast region is also live zone 5, very much prone to disaster like earthquake. And the state is also very much vulnerable to climate change impact like heavy rainfall, massive drought, then different other climate impacts that is affecting agriculture and other ecology. And also there is forced displacement of people because of all these calamities and these disasters like dams, minings, and other deforestation and other development, aggressive development push and extractive projects in the state. Let us go to the oil discovery in Assam. Assam is also the largest producer of crude oil in India. The history of the Assam oil business extends back to the period of the British rule, at a time when petroleum first became a primary global energy source. Crude oil was discovered in late 19th century and first oil well was dug in 1866. Digboi is known as the oil city of Assam, where the first oil well in Asia was drilled. The first refinery was started here as early as in 1901. A century old, but the implication of the resources used in globally and traded in American dollars comes with issues that are extremely local. So this is the case of Bagzan oil and gas blowout, which is a very disastrous oil spill in the current period. Set up by Oil India Limited in 2006. Set up by Oil India Limited in 2006, Bagzan 5 well produces around 80,000 standard cubic meter per gas from a 3,870 meters. This is a petroleum gas and oil leak that happened by India Limited's Bagzan, operated by On Energy Private Limited in Suket district of Assam on 27/20. It occurred due to failing pressure system in the oil. The next point, the blowout occurred near Maguri Motapung Bill, adjacent to Dibru Soikhwa National Park, which is very famous for migratory birds. The blast occurred when work over operations for extracting gas from new oil and gas bearing reservoir at a depth of 3,729 meters was on, leaving natural gas and condensate oil to gush out and spill beyond a couple of kilometers, turning the entire area of more than 1.5 kilometer into the gas chamber. The same oil well caught fire on June 9. The fire quickly spread it to a larger area and burned down nearby trees, crops, and houses. The fire also resulted in death of 2 employees of Oil India Limited. Nearly 6,000 people and several villages were evacuated by National Disaster Response Force, Army and Air Force team and personnel. There have been reported deaths of nearby region in nearby area, including some vulnerable species in nearby Dibru Soikhwa National Park are also affected. It reported that some harmful chemicals are also released, creating chance of more damage, overdose aquatic animals, and the ecology in general. As of today, the gas is still leaking uncontrollably. A team of experts from a Singapore-based firm were called to inspect the situation and to help the oil and ONGC teams. Despite the combined efforts by Indian and foreign experts, India National Green Tribunal has India blowout. It recommended that rupees 25 lakhs to be given for houses that were completely destroyed, rupees 10 lakhs for those severely damaged, and rupees 2.5 lakhs for those moderately damaged. The National Human Rights Commission registered a case to investigate oil spill. And also the Assam Human Rights Commission has issued a notification to the Upper Assam Division Commissioner. The notice asks for an immediate inquiry of the condition of the relief camps, where around 7,000 inmates rampant incident in the district. Some of the experiencing and observing in the area. These are local Christians, most farmers, lost their homes, vegetation, grazing land, and livelihood. For most of the families in and around the oil site, fishing or the fishery culture is one of the primary source of livelihood. On the night of June 10th, their boat castle caught fire. A couple of villages
Mr. Tirtha Prasad Satya, are you with us? It seems that you've lost connection. Can our secretariat? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, we have lost the signal from Mr. Tirtha Prasad Satya in the middle of his presentation. We will try to bring him back and for him to continue his presentation for us. But let's move on. For those of you who just joined us, that was Tirtha Prasad Satya of NEADS from the territory of Northeast India in Assam. Now let's go to Meghalaya. Meghalaya is another state embattled by a long history with mining projects. So here we have Mr. Lombok Starwell Mangar. He is the Executive Council President of the Kasi Students Union, or KSU, which was founded in 1978. KSU, noble aspiration for the solidarity and unity, empowerment, and betterment of the Kasi people. With its headquarters in Shillong, KSU has spread to different universities in Meghalaya, in Assam, and Mizoram, and formed numerous units across the country. For the next 15 minutes, please, I invite now Mr. Lombok Starwell Mangar from KSU with your presentation. The floor is yours, Lombok Starwell. We have received updates that Lombok Starwell is having also difficulties in connecting with us live. So can I check with the IPMS DL Secretariat for confirmation before I introduce our next speaker? Let's move on right now, ladies and gentlemen. Our last speaker is an indigenous leader from Manipur. He is the Secretary General of Center for Research and Advocacy Manipur and a very long time Indigenous Peoples rights worker. A prolific researcher and journalist writing with media establishments such as Impal Free Press, epow.net, and producer of documentary films on land and Indigenous peoples' rights. Let's welcome Mr. Jitan Yumnam from Center of Research Manipur. Jitan, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just want and thanks to everyone for thanks to the organizers for organizing this meeting. Yeah, I just want to confirm if everyone can see my screen that I have just shared. Hi, Atama, can you see my screen that I just shared?
Yes, Jiten, please.
Okay, all right.
Please
Thank you
continue
very
the
much.
presentation. Yes.
All right. Today I will be sharing on the extractives in Manipur, which I will be focusing on some of the issues and challenges and concern around the pursuits of extractive industries in Manipur. When I talk about extractives, I will focus on the ongoing effort to drill oil and also to mine some of the major minerals from Manipur, especially chromium, limestone, and copper. So in the extractive industry has been pursued in Manipur for quite some time, and especially since the opening of India's economy from 1990 onwards, with the liberalization of India's economy, the targeting of the land and resources of Manipur, and also even across Northeast, especially including our friends from Meghalaya, no? Because that is also where mining has been a major concern. So the pursuits of extractive industry is in the context of India's opening up its economy, towards a more liberalized, with India adopting a new liberal order of development. And India also comes up with this Act East policy. And under this policy, there has been an intensification of the targeting of the land and resources of Manipur and across the Northeast region. There are a series of MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding signed by the government of India and also along with the regional governments, government of Manipur, government of Meghalaya, for example, with series of mining companies all around, not just from India, but even from mining companies from Europe, from US, from ASEAN countries, and also from East Asia. Tito also refer to some of the policies and the introduction part. But what is happening is also some of the laws, what we find is a deregulation of policies and laws. So there are a series of policies that are introduced in our part of the world, and also the deregulation of policy that existed earlier, but now increasingly been amended and revised to provide a more enabling environment for the multinational companies to operate in our part of the world. So along with India's AGES policy, the draft environment impact assessment, and then the mineral policy of 2019. So there are a series of policies that, that relax the policies, to provide a more conducive environment for the corporate bodies to, to come up with dam building, with oil and gas exploration, mining, and several other projects in the region. And what we are also increasing find in our part is the increased financing by various multinational and also the international financial institutions. So we are also seeing a lot of the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, then even the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. A lot of these financial institutions are becoming more active in promoting a development process that target our land and resources in our part of the world. And the general concern is the non-recognition of indigenous people's rights has been one of the biggest concerns. So yes, so I was referring to the policy deregulation, and there are a series of policies that facilitate the pursuits of extractive industry. I just want to mention some of the policy. The Northeast Hydrocarbon Vision is one. The Mineral Policy of 2019, this is a newly introduced policy just last year. The Mineral Laws Amendment Act of 2020, this is another law introduced this year. This is more to facilitate the privatization of the mining industry. And then, of course, there are amendments earlier in 2015, the Mining and Minerals Amendment Bill of 2015. So these are all policies that provides a more, more liberalized and more privatized forms of mining that will, enhance the role and direct involvement of multinational companies from all around. And then, of course, the recently introduced the the foreign direct investment policy. This is like liberalizing the investment regime from finances from other countries and also from India is concerned. And of course, we also have the policies, challenges with existing policy, the Oil Field Regulation Act, 1948, and then the Manipur Hydropower Policy, 2012. And then, of course, there are also efforts to dilute the existing policies now. So one of the major concerns when it comes to the extractive industry in Manipur is the mining of minerals in Manipur. It's like in Manipur, we have resources like limestone, chromium, nickel, copper, platinum group of elements, spread along the Indo-Myanmar border, in Manipur. And there are estimates that in terms of the limestone, it's around 10 million tons of limestone. And then for chromium, we have around 6 million, nearly 5.5 million, spread over 4 districts of Manipur, along the Indo-Myanmar border. So these are the minerals, limestone and chromium are the minerals which are majorly targeted for extraction in Manipur.
Mr. Jiten, can we request that you slow down your presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and yes, so these are some of the minerals that which are proposed in Manipur. And what we are finding is there are a series of memorandum of understandings signed this in the last several years. So these are memorandum signed for extraction of minerals, especially chromium and limestone. So we have some of the companies which are involved include the Service Refractory Private Limited, the Rourkela Mineral Private Limited. So these are companies which are, and then the Balasore Alloy Limited, for example. So these are companies which are based in Orissa and other central parts of India, which are, we receive contract to commence mining of chromium in Manipur. And around this time, there are also agreements signed with mining companies to commence mine of limestone. And some of the companies include the Super Ore, and then the Gulf Natural Resources Private Limited. So these are based in Gurgaon. So some of the concern with the increased involvement of mining companies in Manipur is the lack of consultation with the people of Manipur, and especially the lack of failure to consult and take the consent of the people with the different indigenous communities in Manipur. And another is the failure to conduct a detailed social and environmental impact assessment. So because like Tirtha said, Manipur is also very much in 2 biodiversity hotspot zone, the Eastern Himalaya biodiversity hotspot, and then the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. Out here is very, very fragile, and extensive mining onslaught, it will further disturb and create, it will disturb the social and environmental impact. So the failure to take the consent of people and the social environmental impact, and so these are some of the specific impact. And then of course the issues around the recognition of community rights over the land and resources, indigenous peoples' self-determined development rights. I think this is one area where the indigenous right over the land and resources has not been recognized. So this has been a long contentious issue. So there has been quite strong resistance or objection to this mining effort for quite some time, especially the effort to mine chromium, for example, there are a lot of concern within the communities, and there are different indigenous group and environmental group have already expressed concern with the chromium mining plan in Manipur. And in fact, so the resistance is slowly building out here. And it's all centered around the issues of adverse impact, the issues around the non-recognition of community right over the land and resources, the issues around the corporate unaccountability, because a lot of the companies which the government signed for mining of chromium, for example, many of these companies like Balasore Alloy, and then even the other Gulf Natural Resources, for example. So many of these companies are already controversial in other parts of India for for the neglect of social impact and environmental impact in other parts. So in Manipur, the issues around corporate unaccountability and And Manipur is also right in the middle of conflict. So it's an unresolved conflict situation, and with a lot of emergency law and other security legislation. So what people are expressing concern out here is the pursuance of mining will further intensify the pattern of mining, and also aggravate the nature and impact of conflict in Manipur. No? So the promulgation of mining, the intrusion of mining will further aggravate and intensify the intensity, and also the dimension, and also the impact of conflict in Manipur. So this is also one another concern. So and also the objection to mining in Manipur is also premised on the previous experience. No, like there is a place called Hundung, where earlier the government set up the Hundung cement factory and mining of limestone. So people had very bad experience out there, in terms of the social impact, environmental impact, land dispute, and corruption in the management of the cement factory as well. So based on those experiences, and even in the village called Lumher in Phangri, the villagers were compelled to stop the initial mining operation and surveys, because the mining company was actually taking more minerals, in the pretext of conducting surveys. So there is a long-standing objection to mining in Manipur. Yeah. So another aspect of extractive industry pursuit in Manipur is the issue of oil and gas exploration. And Manipur, apart from the minerals we have, it's also confirmed to have rich deposits of oil and gas. And what we are seeing is a lot of companies from Ireland. There is a company called Tullow Oils, and then a company from Holland. We have the company called Jubilant Oil and Gas Private Limited, and then of course the Oil India Limited. So these are some of the companies that are extensively involved in mining, which are extensively involved in trying to extract oil and gas from Manipur. Yeah, I just want to show one picture. So this is in a village called Singcha Gyamnom in the eastern part of Manipur, and this is one of the flower, the local call it the Wuyayon flower, and this is one of the rare flower in Manipur itself. And there's another flower called Siroi. So what we are worried is the pursuance of mining projects in the region will further impact on the rich biodiversity, this flower and many other flowers in the region. So the momentum to stop mining is slowly building up out here. And then when it comes to the oil exploration, I will get back to the oil exploration and challenges now. I was referring to some of the companies, Tullow Oils, Jubilant Oil and Gas, Asian Oilfield, Oil India Limited. So these are some of the companies that are increasingly involved with efforts to drill oil and gas from Manipur. And so in 2010 and 11, so there are instances where the government of India, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, it conferred contract or license to ownership to Jubilant Oil and Gas in 2010 and 11. So and without the consultation and consent of the people, and without even informing the people. So this has led to a lot of anger and a lot of objection from different communities of Manipur. And so when the company tried to conduct public hearing, environmental public hearing, so the communities affected, they come up with strong protests against oil exploration in 2012. Yeah, and then again in 2017, Oil India Limited, it tries to conduct another survey in different parts of Manipur. And that time again, the people were coming up and, resisting the oil exploration. But then despite the objection and resistance from the different communities of Manipur, what we are seeing is the oil companies continues to make efforts to conduct survey and, whatever efforts to start drilling work all over. So that's been a long-standing concern, and and this is happening despite the resistance in Manipur. So this is the occasion where the government signed a memorandum of contract signing between the government of India and Jubilant Oil and Gas in 2010. So another concern is the policy when it comes to the policy on oil, like in mining, because a lot of the policies on oil, like the Oilfield Act 1948, and then the Oil Industry Development Act of 1974. So these are laws that we feel that it doesn't recognize the community right over the land and resources. And because immediately when you have oil, under these policies, it confers ownership to the central government of India. So which means it doesn't have provisions to recognize indigenous right over the land resources. No, like for example, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, it clearly states that indigenous people's right over the it recognizes indigenous right over the land and resources. No, and also it recognizes the right to free, prior, and informed consent before undertaking any extractive industry or any form of other unsustainable development. So what we are concerned is the oil policies in India, no, and including the newly introduced policy like the Northeast Hydrocarbon Vision of 2020, which was introduced just 2016, just recently. So this laws have failed to recognize the indigenous right over the land resources, and yeah, so these are the concern as of now, no, when it comes to oil exploration, when it comes to the mining plan as well. And on oil, there has been series of objection to oil exploration and also to mining plan in Manipur. So this is also the response, the protest against oil exploration during the public hearing in Jiribam quite some time back. Yeah, so finally, I just want to come up with brief recommendation. We feel that the governments recognize indigenous people's rights over our land resources, especially indigenous people's self-determined rights over their land resources. Now, which means when I say self-determined rights, it's about recognizing indigenous people's right over their land resources, along with the recognition of their right to free, prior, and informed consent before undertaking extractive and other unsustainable industries. And there has been an ongoing demand that all the memorandum of understanding signed on oil exploration, mining, dam building, because Manipur is also one state where there's been a series of dams already built and series of dams are planned all over here. And again, with limited consultation and without the consent. So we call for the review of all this, revocation of all these memorandum of understandings. And given the failure to consult the people here, and also failure to conduct detailed impact assessment, and also failure to recognize community right, we are calling for a complete stop of oil exploration, mining of chromium, limestone, copper, etc. And we also call for the review and also repeal of policies that undermine indigenous right, no, and other set of policies that facilitate development aggression in our part. So we call for the revocation of like for example, the Northeast Hydrocarbon Vision 2030, the Mineral Policy of 2019, and then of course this is one very controversial, the Draft Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2020 this year. This has been this will take away all process of consultation and even the impact unsustainable and destructive projects like mining and oil exploration and dam building. So we call for a revocation and withdrawal of this draft environment impact notification. And also because Manipur is still a conflict-prone area with emergency laws like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act of 1958 continue to be enforced along with other criminal legislation.
Mr. Jitan Yumnam. Looks like our presenter, Mr. Jitan Yumnam, is also
for promoting development
okay,
or to include this criminal law and also emergency law. Yes.
Jitan Yumnam, you can conclude your presentation. We thought that we lost you. I'm very sorry. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So finally, I just want to say that all development process across Manipur and across Northeast should be with due recognition of indigenous people's right over the land resources, and that all development process should be rooted in the indigenous people's right, their wish and aspiration, and it should be rooted in human right-based approach to development. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you everyone for your kind and patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jiten Yumnan from Manipur. Jiten is from the CRAM. A while ago, we had Mr. Tirtha Prasad from Assam, but we lost him on connection. But he is back with us right now. So let's return to the presentation of Mr. Tirtha Prasad from NEADS. Over to you. We welcome you back, Mr. Tirtha Prasad.
Yes, thank you, Atama Katama. I am extremely sorry for the inconvenience in between. This is the network problem in my area. So extremely sorry for that. I would like to share the remaining slides from my presentation. So with your permission. Can you see my slide?
We note that your slide is beginning to start on our screen sharing, but perhaps you can straight away go into your presentation points while we await your presentation on the screen.
Okay, thank you. So I have shared a brief about Bagzan oil spill and gas blowout. So this is the second part of my presentation, the battle over coal mining in Assam. Coal mining in Assam has been India's national priority despite the ecosystem destruction, degradation of water and land resources, and adverse health implication that it brings. The Northeastern Coalfield Offices that is based in Margherita in Upper Assam district of Tinsukia. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. The third point, coal was discovered in the state of, Coal was discovered in the state of Assam of the northeastern region more than 250 years ago. But the systemic mining of coal was started in 1888 by the former Assam Railway and Trading Company. Mining was first started at Makum coalfields near Margherita. In the following years, many new fields were started in the nearby areas. Productions, which was around 2 lakh ton at the beginning of this century, now increased up to 12.10 lakh ton during 1993 to 1994. So this is the This is few of the snapshots of Dihing Patkai illegal coal mining works that is being undertaken. Next slide. So about the Dihing Patkai, it is located in the Dibrugarh and Tinsukia districts of Assam, which cover an area of 111.19 square kilometer rainforest. The rainforest stretches for more than 575 square kilometer in the districts of Dibrugarh, Tinsukia, and Sibsagar. On 13th June 2004, Dihing Patkai was declared a sanctuary and also a part of Dihing Patkai Elephant Reserve. One part was declared as wildlife sanctuary and the other falls under the Elephant Reserve. The Dihing Patkai forest region is a cultural hub with a dozen of different ethnic groups, traditionally living in coexistence with the forest and using its resources, including indigenous Assamese communities of Tai Phake, Tai Khamyang, Tai Khamti, Singpho, Nokte, Tai Ahom, Koivoto, Moran, Motok, Burmese, Tea tribes, Adivasi peoples, and Nepali people. For the indigenous people of Assam, Dihing Patkai is very symbolic. Every January, the Dihing Patkai festival is being celebrated to highlight the indigenous culture and the land abundance. Very interestingly, during this lockdown imposed for COVID-19 pandemic, a coal mining project was approved in the Saleki proposed reserve forest, which is a part of the Dihing Patkai Elephant Reserve Forest on 7th April 2020. The decision was taken in the National Board for Wildlife in its 56th meeting through a video conference. The committee had to use a large proportion of Saleki land for coal mining project by Northeastern Coalfield. amid pandemic COVID, this unexpected approval had raises a lot of concerns and protests among people. Because of rising people's demand, the Northeastern Coalfield, a Coal India Limited subsidiary body, they have announced the temporary suspension of all its mining operations. Assam government decided to upgrade Dehing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary into a national park. What we have observed as a result of the current coal mining as the adverse impact in the ecology. There is large scale landscape damage in the region. There is soil erosion that is happening very massively in those areas where the mining is going on, loss of forest ecosystem and wildlife habitat, also air, water and soil pollution that is occurring in the area. So lastly, a few recommendations we would like to urge on in front of you all, that the human rights and entitlements of the people must be considered, respected by the state and the corporations equally, then profit for business. A pro-people and community-centered mechanism should be developed to watch and ensure social accountability of the companies. We would like to urge the international community to share solidarity and support towards our movement against such repression and corporate plunder. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening, and yeah, thank you for sharing your solidarity and support. And we look forward in the days to come to share all the happenings and affairs that we are facing in our region. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you, Mr. Tita Prasad, and thank you for coming back to give us the presentation. We thought that we lost you. It's a challenge today because most indigenous peoples' territories may not have the best possible way of connecting to the internet. Welcome back, everyone. Let me remind all of us that you could share solidarity through using hashtags. Let me read them out. The first hashtag is called Stand for Northeast. Our second hashtag of the day is Defend IP Rights. And our third hashtag for the day is Defend Ancestral Lands. If you are watching us right now, we have just concluded 2 speakers for today. And although time is not on our side, as time is always limited, other Northeast India states in Mizoram, in Sikkim, in Naga, Uttar Pradesh may also have similar struggles and experiences as those shared earlier by our speakers Jiten and Atirtha. So we invite you all to stay updated with ILPS Commission 10 and IPM SDL, because we will surely have more discussions to expand this conversation. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, let's watch first a special performance from an amazing band in Impal, Manipur. The band is called Impal Talkies, and they share you their song entitled Loktak Ngami Ishay. Please welcome Impal Talkies.
Loktak na aigi iuni, loktak na aigi imani nong madon manawang bara loktak mana mawangi male mana lumbara loktak mana marumi nong madon manawang bara loktak mana mawangi male mana lumbara loktak mana marumi aigi fum siyang may tari ng kanano limlay nga gong chandari ba ang ngawa shingi hingbagi hak matliba ng kanano Molaban ang gilichat molaban ang giturela murat pa ni amot palok takta aigi fum siyang may tari ba ng kanano limlay nga gong chandari ba ang ngawa shingi hingbagi hak matliba ng kanano Molaban ang gilichat molaban ang giturela murat pa ni amot palok takta aigi fum siyang may tari ba ng kanano limlay nga gong chandari ba ang ngawa shingi hingbagi hak matliba ng kanano Molaban ang gilichat molaban ang giturela murat pa ni amot palok takta
A very special thanks to our presentation, wonderful music, and the imaging is startling. That is a fantastic song titled Loktok Ngami Ishay, brought to you by a band from Impal. They're called the Impal Talkies. Welcome back to our webinar. And I just wanted to give you an update about some questions that has come through our Zoom page. We have received more than 5 questions now, and we will read them out later when we have the question and answer session. So if you have questions and any thoughts, please send it to us on our Zoom chat box. But right now, we want to move on to the reactors of our webinar today and give them some time for them to provide their messages and responses to our 2 speakers, Tirtha Prasad and Jitin Yunam, and of course their insights on our discussion. So now let's hear from an environment and climate justice activist and member of the Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders, or APNED. She's the executive director of Center for Environmental Concerns of the Philippines, CEC. She's also a member of the ILPS Commission 19 on Environment and Climate Justice. I invite now Ms. Leah Alonzo from the Philippines. Leah.
Hi, good day to everyone. Based on what I have heard from the previous speakers, you can see that environmental destruction for the benefit of the few big business corporations in Northeast India is similar with many communities and organizations in Asia Pacific and other parts of the world. So while these corporations rake in big profits, local communities are left with degraded ecosystems, and we are left to suffer from these impacts. So when people stand up for their rights, they are silenced and they are violently attacked. And there's a trend in these attacks on land environmental defenders. So first, these are reprisals after these defenders have engaged in environmental defense in asserting their rights. And second, it is the criminalization and red tagging that is used as justification for the attacks on environmental defenders. And third, these attacks are investment guarantees or a way to ensure that the so-called development projects push through. And the last, that it is mostly the state forces that are suspected to be behind these attacks, which we see as a way or a connivance among the big business and the governments to ensure these sort of projects. So while it is these human rights violations that has brought us together here today, we also hope that it will also lead to stronger solidarity and unity among communities and countries to ensure the democratic participation of the citizens and the protection of our natural resources. So we hope that the environmental defenders in Northeast India will not tire of asserting their rights. And we in the Asia Pacific Network of Environmental Defenders would like to show our solidarity with the people of Northeast India. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah Alonzo from APNED in the Philippines, for a very important insight on environment protection and perspective in the region. For our next reactor, we go to London. We have Professor of Law and Chair of Middlesex University in London and Executive Director of Minority Rights Group International, to share his views about today's topic and its intersection with minority rights, access to justice, and the interplay between security, development, and human rights. In London, here's Professor Joshua Castellino. Over to you, Joshua.
Thank you very much, Atama and Tirtha and Jiten. Fantastic presentations. The documentation of these issues so clearly put together, the legal analysis, it's extremely good. And the band was just fantastic as well. And thank you for the welcoming words as well, Beverly, and thank you for having me in this forum. It's great to have these kinds of opportunities to speak to all of you. My comments are going to be brief enough. I'm a bit concerned that I may have frozen. Have I frozen? Have I frozen, Atama? I'm okay. Okay. Yeah, just some brief comments. Colleagues, it's not by accident that we have got to this precipice in terms of climate change. It's really through a systematic exploitation of overconsumption and then creating marketplaces so that people can buy products that they don't need. And of course, the classic version of this colonization that has taken place over 200 years or more has disrupted local economies and local ways of life and presented only one route of living as a valid one. And it's defeated all other kinds of styles of living and lifestyles. And that, I guess too, is a virus of plunder. It's a virus of plunder that lasts over centuries. So we now stand at a precipice. Climate change is destroying our societies. Of course, immediately right now, coronavirus is destroying our societies, and government seems unable to act. And that's possibly because at the time of greatest need, we have possibly the least competent people in being able to govern. And that's also not an accident. That's also a way in which society has been engineered to create values and create processes that will give us this kind of a broken society. But I really would encourage you not to look at what is broken and to focus instead on how it can be fixed. Because for a too long a time, we have just been staring at a barren desert and pointing out how barren the desert is, when actually what we need is exactly what Jiten and Tirtha have called for and that Beverly called for at the start. We need solidarity and we need solutions. And we need to get this solidarity and solutions working hand in glove, bringing peoples of the world, especially indigenous peoples at this point in time, to the forefront to try and rectify these changes that have been created. So how do we do it? And of course, that's the big question. And I think two of our speakers called for this, the international solidarity that's required to be able to put the stories of indigenous communities to the wider world. I think about it as educating majorities. We need to educate majorities as to what it is that indigenous people's values are and why it is that those values are central. And that if those values had not been disrupted by colonization, and don't think colonization is a European phenomena, we have found that our Asian states are much better at colonization than our colonial masters were. They have treated indigenous peoples, in law we call them as objects and not subjects. They are objects in the way that you treat a river or a tree. They are not human subjects with a right to consent. And again, Jiten, you pointed this out in your presentation, the lack of consent, almost like you treat an indigenous community as a stone or as a mine. So there is this aspect there that we really do need to highlight in terms of getting those stories out into the wider world and getting humanity to react as humanity, not as selfish individuals who want to make more for themselves, but as humanity who understand what a collective good is and how to achieve it. And this is the right time for it, because in all societies across the world, coronavirus has made a massive difference and has decimated these societies. So we're looking for alternatives now, even in places where we wouldn't look for it elsewhere. And you've seen also this nexus between the 1% wealthy and incompetent people who are governing in their name and the destruction that they are causing. They are unable to combat a virus. They are unable to develop growth. They are unable to create proper employment. But what they do know is a way to just continue wanton destruction of pristine societies that they had no stake in maintaining as pristine societies. So it's vital that indigenous peoples come to the forefront and these voices are heard wider. But the voices that need to be heard are also about the climate change solutions, the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, and how it is that traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples is crucial to protecting biodiversity and protecting the environment. We still have this incredible belief that Western science will solve all our problems. There's no basis for that. There really is no basis for that. Western science has given us the system of exploitation and overexploitation that has decimated our forests. Western science has also been unable to cope with the after effects of some of the diseases that are spreading. I'm not saying Western science is a bad thing, but the nature of science itself is to think wider and to look for all kinds of solutions. And in that voice, the exclusion of indigenous peoples and their marginalization has meant that Western science is limited in what it can achieve. So we need traditional philosophies and traditional knowledge and traditional medicine to feed in a much greater way than it has, to break the domination of a very few people who are emboldened by corporations and backed by corporations to tell us what the science should do. Here in Britain, our government has been telling us they have been following the science in terms of prevention of coronavirus spread. Well, if they're following that science, the science should be binned, because it has had absolutely no effect in actually finding a way to protect ordinary people. And that's not the fault of the science. It's the way in which science has a nexus with particular corporations that ultimately justify the wanton putting of profits over people. So we need that, and I would encourage Jiten and Tirtha to share the details of exactly which corporations are doing what, to try and find a way to go up the supply chain to the countries in which these companies are headquartered, to try and combat them there. Because environmental standards that exist now include free, prior, informed consent. And we need to make sure that when these corporations file their profits in their headquarters, that there is some kind of an accountability for that. And accountability is crucial in terms of guaranteeing the rights of indigenous communities all over the world. And we're working in Kenya as well. as minority rights group, and we're finding very similar processes, just as Leah pointed out. It's global, it's Asia Pacific wide, it's worldwide. There is a new process, of course, that's coming, and I call your attention to it in particular, which is this idea of the protected areas. This is a UN sponsored goal to try and ensure that there's greater protected areas in the name of protection of the environment. Now, just consider this, colleagues. It is not indigenous peoples who are responsible for climate change. It's global urban centers, such as the one I'm based in London, that are responsible for the vast majority of carbon emissions that are creating and driving climate change. Yet the protected areas push will mean that indigenous peoples are dispossessed from lands in which they live, so that the globe can recover in terms of climate change. There is no justice in that process at all, first of all, because you can't make indigenous peoples collateral for the urbanization that has occurred, unknown to them and of no interest to them. You have to get the urban centers to change, not the indigenous areas to change. So that's the first element to it. But the second, more disastrous element to it, beside the injustice, is we do not know, outside indigenous peoples, we do not know how to protect the environment. We have proven over 200 years that we are unable to put the planet above our profit. So actually taking indigenous areas out of the protected area, out of those areas, is the worst possible outcome in terms of environmental justice. Indigenous peoples need to be central to the fight against climate change, not peripheral to it. So we need to pay attention to this 30% protected areas and what it actually means in terms of just the goal of combating climate change. Forget about the human rights for a moment. I would say that if you want to understand how to combat climate change here and now in 2020, who is it that you should ask? It's a straightforward question. You need to ask the people who have managed to protect the environment, who live in 80% of the world's biodiversity, who live with them and among them. That's who we should be asking. We should not be eliminating them and creating more protected areas, wilderness areas, especially because these wilderness areas came from colonization. The first protected area was in the Congo Basin, and that was not because it wanted to protect the Batwa, who are our partners. We work with the Batwa in the Congo Basin. It was the protected areas there were not to protect the Batwa. It was to protect an elephant sanctuary for the King Leopold, to go elephant hunting. That was why it was a protected area. And that tells you everything you need to know about protected areas. So I call on you to be alert to this push for protected areas. We need to hear your voices much, much louder. It's the job of organizations like mine to amplify this voice, to make sure that we educate the majorities, and also to hold corporations in particular to account. One final plea, please continue the documentation. That documentation that you're doing is vital. It can be used in courts of law. It can be used to educate the majority, and it may not be, you will not get change through it immediately. So I don't want to give you any false hope. This is a long struggle, colleagues. You know that better than anybody else. This is a very long struggle. It can't be measured in weeks and months and years. It is measured in decades. But slowly and surely, we are back to the center of this fight, because it's not just indigenous communities who need it, it's all of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, all the way from London, giving us your reaction to our topic of the webinar. We had heard now two reactors just a while ago, Professor Joshua Castellino from MRG International and from Leah Alonzo from APNED in the Philippines. Oh, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the part for question and answers, and I shall read some of them and pose these questions to our speakers. Earlier, we received a question from Bangladesh Indigenous Women's Network. So the question here is for Jiten, Tirtha, and our reactors. From Bangladesh Jagon Hill Tracts, the Juma peoples are facing multiple discrimination and heavy militarization related to entry of resource extraction. What can you say about the situation in Manipur or other indigenous peoples' minority territories about militarization and resource plunder? That will be question number one for all of us. And question number two comes from the Southeast Indigenous Peoples Center. And the second question is for Tirtha and Jiten. The question is, how are women leading the struggle to secure collective wealth for indigenous peoples? Let's go to question number one about militarization and resource plunder. And I invite each of you to perhaps give a response of 2 minutes each. Okay, let's start with Tirtha Prasad Saika. Sorry. Tirtha.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Tirtha. Please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. What we are observing is that women seems to be empowered really with all these issues that is happening to them, happening in society or in the local level. Women seems to be organized. Many civil society organizations, associations, or institutions, they are organizing, mobilizing communities, especially women in the village, at the micro level, against all this suppression and repression that is happening to them. And like in many areas, women are taking very proactive decision and role. Like there are issues related to construction of dams, there are issues related to minings, there are problems related to different development-induced disaster. Women are taking leadership in initiating social actions to proclaim their rights and entitlements. Many women headed organizations, women community-based leaders, they are taking leadership in taking up rallies, campaigns, sending memorandums, giving press release and all, initiating campaigns. So these things are actually taking place in the community. So I can say maybe the women are taking a proactive role and decisions, but things need to be followed up frequently, and they need to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Tirtha.
Address the question.
Okay, I now invite Jiten. Jiten, please respond to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Atama, and thank you very much for the questions. Just on the first question, yes, militarization and human rights violation has long been a concern in Manipur. And there are several cases, like for example, in the case of hydropower dam building in Manipur, for example, there are several dams, dam sites which are already militarized, no? And then what we are worried is that many of the proposed mining area or even the proposed oil exploration area, so we feel that those are even militarized as well. So there are several impacts of the militarization. Say, for example, there are several incidents like in Kuga Dam or in Mapitel Dam, where because of the militarization, when communities calls for the rehabilitation or for their rights, so there are times where the military intervene, and then so in some situations indigenous leaders are killed, or many got injured, like in 2005 in the case of Kuga Dam, for example, so involved in the military. So there are several cases of direct impact of militarization, and of course whenever you have militarization, there is always an issue of the impact on the land itself, apart from the direct physical violence and impact on women and children. So it's an issue very much in Manipur, and also because, as I said, Manipur is very much an armed conflict situation, and we have several emergency law that, like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that permits the full-scale deployment of the army, and also in the context of combating the armed opposition group as well. So that's one of the issue. And then secondly, on your question on the women's role in effort to promote collective ownership of land, or yes, I just want to recall that in our campaign against oil exploration in Manipur, for example, 2012, 2017, 11. So the women takes a very important role in terms of, like if you see the protests against oil exploration in Jiribam, and then in Numba, for example, Tamelong, the women takes a very important role. And in fact, the oil survey could not proceed further. The progress could not be there. I think it's partly also because of the women's direct and indirect role. But that said, there are areas that we need to improve on, in terms of the leadership and in terms of the women's role in decision making. say, for example, there are issues around the women's role in the traditional decision-making of the village authorities, for example. So there are concerns around there. But probably I think those are areas that we need to improve. And then, of course, in the larger decision-making or in the larger challenging the policy, for example, or yeah, so I think those are areas that we can still further improve, and also in terms of the role of women in asserting more rights over land and resources. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jiten. Let's go to London and get your response, Professor Joshua, on these two questions about resource extraction, militarization, and then also about how women are leading in the struggle to secure collective wealth as indigenous peoples. Professor Joshua, if you're still here.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Atama. Three very different questions, of course. And I think that in a sense, let me address the point about women first. There is a fundamental, if we need to get a change, women have to be at the forefront of this change. There's no question about it, because that's the only way in which you shake the patriarchy, both the system that has created it, but also our internal issues and our internal cultural issues that keep women subjugated within our communities. So it has to be, if you want the kind of change that we need to see, it has to be dramatic and it has to be radical. And that means women have to be at the forefront of any effort that we foresee. And getting these perspectives are crucial. When we work with indigenous communities, we emphasize the need to have women's voices at the forefront, because very often you will find that these are the voices that are the most marginalized. And we also work with other intersectional discrimination issues that I think are crucial if we're going to build a more just and fair world. So that's one aspect to it. With regards to the militarization, it's very, very clear to me that we are coming up to a crunch point now where the only way in which some governments can maintain the hold that they have with corporations is to use force. And it's got to that point where you almost need a civil resistance movement of a kind to show that this is actually an incomplete decolonization. That decolonization that started in a country like India in 1947, this is just a pause. We've had a pause there. We have not had decolonization because we have not had the vision of decentralized governance and community and cultural development that we were promised and that we need to have. Instead, what we've had is success. This is not just about the current government. It's about, we've had successive governments who have been unable to create a platform for development for all these communities. That's why Indian politics broke. And that's why essentially we have this continuation of a broken politics. Coronavirus at the moment is surging through India. It's headline news everywhere else, but it's not headline news in India because the info and the death of 1,000 people doesn't really matter, it seems. And that is, I think, synonymous of the kind of challenge that we face. We need to put people at the front of this and not corporations. When you ask yourself who is benefiting from the current state of affairs, you will find that corporate interests are very, very high in there. Those corporate interests need to get to the pristine areas in the northeast of India where the minerals lie. And so they will do whatever it is that it needs to be done to ensure that that supply chain is not disrupted. We need to disrupt it. We need to ensure, first of all, that at the global level, we make the extraction of coal illegal. We treat oil as a stranded asset that cannot be taken out of the ground. We force society back into more sustainable ways of living that benefit all and don't just create incredible wealth for the 1%. Because the other thing that has happened is that the failure to restrict money flows has meant that billionaires can move money around very easily of growth. But that growth doesn't involve jobs. That growth doesn't involve any return to labor. That means that you're creating wealth for a small group of people to get even richer. And ultimately, if you don't create a world where you create job opportunities for vast majorities of people, that's questionable anyway as a value to society. The fact is, even if you do create job opportunities for everyone here and now, if you do that at the cost to the environment, then that's completely short-sighted. So we need a very different approach to trying to resist these kinds of changes. The militarization is just another element to ensure that supply chains to resources will not be disrupted. It's the resource question that we need to put at the heart of it. And I think both Tirtha and Jiten's presentation highlighted. This starts from the land. This starts from recognition of indigenous land rights. And this starts from recognition that indigenous communities need to consent to anything that happens, first of all, in their territory. I would say we need to go broader. We need indigenous voices to determine what happens to all of our planet, not just indigenous territories, because they are the ones who are now, we find, after all this so-called development, they are the only ones who have a track record of conservation. The rest of us don't. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. For the next question, I'm going to bring in Beverly Longid Sakungan. The third question here is, how does COVID-19 affects this virus of plunder? How does COVID-19 affect this virus of plunder? And may I invite back Jiten, Tirtha, and Professor, and joined by Beverly for this third question. Tirtha?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Okay. Yes, the issue of the Hingpatkai coal mining, illegal coal mining trade, when the approval was given by National Board for Wildlife, it was completely a lockdown situation and people were affected by COVID-19 pandemic a lot. And it was complete total shutdown in the country, in the state. No one was able to move from the house, no transportation, no communication. So everyone was confined inside their home and family. At that period, the approval was given through a video conference mode. That is the approval for mining coal in the Dihingpatkaya Wildlife Sanctuary in the Elephant Reserve. So that was like looking at the situation of severe lockdown, how government and subsidiary bodies can extend approval for a illegal coal mining project in Assam. So that's how this, it's like this pandemic situation was creating a lot of opportunity for the plunderers, corporate plunderers and the corporations who want to make profit out of people, out of natural resources, because people were inside their home and they are in a very fearful situation. So in Assam, like along with pandemic COVID-19, the situation of flood was very, very severe. Almost for the last 2 months, there was flood. There were massive flood situation, waves of flooding in the river basin areas, along with this pandemic situation. So this kind of multiple disasters were creating disaster among people. And in that situation, actually, plunderers of resources, that is one of the severe issue. And what we think that the government, states, and the departments or the companies, they were taking it as an opportunity to steal the natural resources from the indigenous territory. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tirtha. Jiten, COVID-19 affecting virus of plunder.
Yeah, just briefly, what the lockdown related to COVID-19 already affected a lot of people who already lose land. No? Like for example, in the people like in Mopitel area, they already lose the land, some forest area, agricultural land. So a lot of those community who are already dealing with hardship because of large-scale unsustainable projects. So now because of the lockdown and then the shortage of food, and then so it creates additional burden and hardship on a lot of the communities who lose the land. So that is there. And then there are a couple of areas where somewhat eviction continues during the lockdown itself. So it poses additional impact in some of the interior, like there's a place called Tamenglong, and then some of the road projects, so large-scale road projects. So eviction happened during the lockdown, and then so there is additional risks to the community, who are compelled to, who are displaced because of those. No, yeah. But then I just also want to reflect, maybe Tirtha can, but in Assam when the oil spill happened, it happened right middle of the lockdown, and then around 4,000 to 5,000 people from there were forced to displace, no, and they are put in a relief camp. And also the problem is, one of the concern is the COVID, the pandemic itself, no, people who are evicted because displaced because of the oil spills, they are forced to, they are kind of accommodated in groups, no. So it also led to the eviction and displacement because of the oil spill right in Assam as well. So I just wanted to reflect on that as well. Another finally out here, I mean, there are so many issues around that, but the one concern is like during the lockdown here, during the pandemic, the draft environment impact assessment notification, it was issued during the phase of lockdown. No? So one of the concern is the issues around the consultation. People even don't, find it difficult to even respond to that. No? So one of the concern is the introduction of the new liberal policies during the lockdown itself. No? And then in Manipur, one of the department concerned with the power generation, they issued this expression of interest. They called for a global tender, inviting global dam building companies for building around 29 new dams in Manipur. No? So those tenders were floated during the pandemic. No? So I think, I mean, there are other issues, but those are some of the concerns. Yeah. And of course,
okay. Thank you very much, Jiten. Over to Professor Joshua and then followed by Beverly. COVID-19 affecting the virus of plunder. What's up, Professor?
Yeah, I can't seem to get my video to come on again. Yeah, sorry, I keep trying. And Atama, I told you if you have to call me Joshua, right? So, yeah, no, thank you. It's interesting, the COVID-19, we've seen recently, for instance, the Sentinelese tribe in Andaman Islands infected. And that's, again, the classic. This is not new, colleagues. If you look back at how Maori were affected when the British first arrived to New Zealand, the Maori population went from around 400,000 to 130,000 in the space of 30 years because of outside viruses coming in and destroying these societies. We've seen this virus affecting societies, and we've seen in places like Brazil almost an actual attempt by the government to make sure that the virus spreads into Amazon lands. In Kenya, in a case that we're dealing with, we won the first phase of the case, giving the Ogiek people in the Mau forest their right to the forest. The second phase was meant to be in March. It was postponed to September. It was decided that the African court would do the hearing by Zoom. At the last minute, the hearing was supposed to be yesterday and today. At the last minute, on Thursday, the Kenyan government said it could not appear before the proceedings because of COVID. But interestingly, in the last 2 months, the Kenyan Forestry Service have been continued to evict people. So you think COVID, which is a contact spreading disease, doesn't stop a forestry service from physically going to evict people, but it stops a government from appearing on a Zoom call in the African Court of Human Rights. Colleagues, what we see here is just basically people who will lie and cheat and insist that they have the legitimacy to govern us. And in doing so, they are basically paying their due processes to the corporations that put them there. They're not putting people first. So COVID has been used as an excuse all over the world to further dispossess and silence indigenous peoples. And the only counteraction to it, and I keep saying that, we should not focus on the negative, we should focus on the positive. The only counteraction to that is that people are waking up to this process. People are realizing that the people they entrusted to govern them don't have either the competence or the moral integrity to be able to fulfill these. And so these kinds of little tricks that these governments are playing all over the world are desperate attempts to make sure, and COVID has provided a very useful excuse to them. We need to call it out every time we see it. We need to speak to power, and we need to do it together in solidarity. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Joshua. Over to you now, Beverly.
Probably the only thing that I could add is indeed, government and business have successfully weaponized the COVID-19 pandemic against not only indigenous peoples, but against people who are critical and resisting the current situation, economic and political situation that they find themselves in. And this situation is not only limited here in Asia, but in fact, we can see similar observations in all parts of the world. One, most of the states would actually respond through a military solution for a medical problem. Two, we see the incompetence of governments of states to address the pandemic. In fact, in many of, especially in developing countries, the lack or absence of a comprehensive plan to address the issue, despite the big number of aid that comes into government much has really been not put to use to address the pandemic. So we see also the what do you call it, the relative problem of graft and corruption in government. Maybe it would be better to look at how do indigenous peoples, organizations, and communities be able to fight COVID at the same time being able to assert their rights to self-determination and being able to defend their territories against these encroachments and corporate incursions. I would challenge that. I think we really need to be not to be silent or to be locked down by COVID, but trying to harness the best creativity that we can to be able to conduct activities, online or offline, especially for offline activities, being able to do this and still being COVID compliant. I mean, protocol compliant in terms of physical distancing, the masks, and everything. Second, while indeed we also face COVID, most of the governments actually are now in the process or have actually amended or passed on new legislations in relation to national security. So now we have the situation where you have COVID and at the same time you have stricter and more repressive laws that governments are enacting against the people who would express their dissent, or criticism for government projects and policies. So for me, again, as I've mentioned, we should not be locked down by these two situations that we find ourselves in, but rather we should still bring out the best creativity that we can. And third, to still be able to foster international solidarity, despite the limitations and the circumstances. And I'm pretty sure that like our ancestors and those who have struggled before us, that we shall overcome this situation and be able to make a better world for future generations.
Yes, indeed. Our ancestors are with us in this time of great upheaval. We have one question, and we decided to take this because this is a question from combined organizations, from IPNI, the Asian Indigenous Peoples Network for Extractive Industry, which is a Asia-wide organization, and Friends from India. I think this is a very, very good way to end our webinar today with a question. And may I ask our reactors and our speakers to conclude with your final message after answering this last question. Here is the question: how can the right of self-determination be applied in eliminating this virus of plunder? How can the right of self-determination be applied in eliminating this virus of plunder? Tirtha, Jiten, Joshua, and finally, Beverly. Over to you, Tirtha.
Yes, what I understand, self-determination is community are able to take decision, they are able to do assessment, they are able to do appraisal, what is happening in their own locality. When a company come to operate in that area, the company need to do the public hearing at the beginning, and they need to follow all certain policies that is required as per protocol that is set by United Nations or Constitution of the country. So that need to be actually operated. The community need to be engaged in that process, in that development process. So then community, they decide whether it is benefiting them or it is going to be a suitable prospects for them or not, or whether it is going to be a destructive or impactive establishment for them. So like that, so engaging the community, that is very important in this self-determination process, and participating community in all process of public hearings, all process of
We apologize for losing Tirta once again, but let's move on. Jiten?
Yeah, thank you for that very important question. Like in Manipur, whenever we come up with campaign against oil exploration or against energy projects, I think the people has been insisting on the recognition and the application of the principle of right to self-determination. So, for example, the affected communities, people affected by oil exploration or mining has been insisting the government to recognize the right over their land and resources in the territory, and also to recognize the right to self-determined development, which means to recognize their right to free, prior, and from consent. So this has been a process that the communities has long been demanding to the government. And then, in fact, in that process, the different indigenous people has been trying to build solidarity and also unity, and and while engaging with the government and also with other concerned stakeholders, with the companies or even the financiers and all. So that is there. And finally, I think we, the communities also need to challenge policies or the neoliberal policies, for example, that increasingly undermine indigenous rights, and also that increasingly fail to consider the democratic voice of the communities. So those neoliberal policies, and we talk about series of policies, including policies that promote criminalization and repression and separation of indigenous groups. So I think those policies and those neoliberal or unsustainable development model need to be, rethink and reviewed and also challenged, to ensure that indigenous rights are fully upheld. So in that process, I think the greater continued building of the indigenous people solidarity and unity across, not just in Manipur, but even across Northeast and even beyond, I think that is very fundamental to advancing indigenous people's right to self-determination. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What do you have to say, Joshua?
Yeah, Atama, two things it's not, and I'm sorry my colleague Tirtha got cut off because I think he was making similar points, but essentially two things it's not and two things it should be. One thing it's not, this idea that governments somehow have the right to all the resources in that governance that we then entrust them to decide what's best for. The track record on that is terrible. The track record of colonial powers was terrible. The track record of current so-called decolonized governments all across Asia, Africa, and Latin America is terrible. The governments don't know what is best. So we need to question that element itself. The second thing it's not is the government cannot decide in a paternalistic manner what is good for the indigenous peoples. That has also proven to be disastrous, and it's given us this point that we're at the precipice right now with the climate emergency. We are really, really at the edge of it, and you're seeing that. I think if you're in Assam, you're seeing it much more perhaps than you are in any of the other places that we are in. But that's been caused by the fact that there are people who think they know better than indigenous peoples on what's good for the territory. So those are the two things it's not. So what is it then what is self-determination? One, it's the right of indigenous peoples to own, in a legal sense, in a full legal sense, to own the title to their territory. That's the fundamental first step to it. And second, it's the right of indigenous peoples, as Jiten was just saying, to consent to what happens to that territory. Very, very simple. It's not much more complicated than that. Recognize ancient title, not give back native title. Did not give back, recognize. It's already existed. It's your legal system that has failed to understand it. So give back, recognize ancient legal title, and then let the rights holders decide what happens to that territory. That's what modern self-determination should be.
Thank you, Joshua. Beverly.
Well, I think one that we need to understand when peoples is that this is a right, that people can exercise, especially in situations of oppression and exploitation. Second, this is not also a right that will further violate the rights of other peoples. So in other words, it should be taken also in cognizance of the rights and welfare of non-indigenous peoples. So in this context, when we speak of solidarity or unity, we do not only speak solidarity and unity among and between indigenous peoples, but of course, a greater solidarity with other peoples and sectors who are also similarly oppressed and exploited by state and governments. Second, I think an important element of self-determination is that more often than not, indigenous peoples, when they oppose projects, minings, or energy that enter into their territories, we're often called to be anti-development. So when we exercise our right to self-determination, either to reject or to approve a project, or even to withdraw a previously given consent to a project, we should also be able to offer alternatives to this kind of projects, and to say that we are not anti-development. Of course, we need electricity. Of course, we need minerals for national industrialization. But all of this should take into context also the benefit of indigenous peoples and the wider country. Because as Jiten and Tirta has shown, much of the profit that comes from these industries do not actually go to India, but it actually goes out in the form of profit for the so-called 1% that Joshua was mentioning. And probably the third point in addressing this virus of plunder, this virus of COVID or whatever, is there's really a need to change the existing neoliberal policies that has been governing our states, the different, governing the people for how many centuries already. And I think the indigenous peoples can give a very good example on what we mean by collective ownership, collective management, and collective good, or good for the commons. No? And these are viable, I think, and sustainable solutions that we can further enhance, so that it will not only be applicable at village or micro level, but being able to look at it in a wider context. For me, that would be self-determination, unifying, and at the same time developmental and sustainable.
Thank you very much. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We've answered 4 questions from you. I take the final question is very, very interesting. Wonderful question once again from our audience. A fantastic exchange and answers from all our speakers and reactors. For all other questions and inputs, we will forward them to our speakers and reactors for their answers. So keep posted on the ILPS Commission 10 website and social media to be updated. Sadly, we are in the last part of today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver our closing message and challenge to everyone. Here is an indigenous Igorot youth from the Philippines, Miss Renz Cuyop, from the International Solidarity Commission of the Cordillera Peoples Alliance. Also, she's a member of the organization ILPS Commission 10 and the IPM-SDL. Renz Cuyop, over to you now. Renz. Please unmute yourself, Renz. We want to hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Atama. I hope you can hear me as it's raining out here. But I'll just keep it short and sweet. So let me just go ahead and reiterate the salient points raised by our speakers and the reactors during this webinar. So from the speakers coming from the different organizations representing different indigenous groups, we see a common experience and common struggle among the indigenous groups from Northeast India, from their struggles or their fight against the entry of corporate interests like extractive industries, oil exploration, energy projects in their territories, and all the, also a common experience is the laid out legal framework from the state to further repress the dissent or the opposition from the ground coming from the indigenous peoples. So all of these are also present not only among indigenous peoples but in other communities. And let me just emphasize the message coming from Professor Castellino about the role of indigenous peoples in the fight for climate change, climate justice, and the preservation of our ecology. As indigenous peoples, we have practices, traditional knowledge and practices, including our struggle for self-determination and liberation, which helps in the preservation of our ecology, our environment, and life itself. And therefore, we as indigenous peoples should be central in the fight for climate, in fight, the fight against climate change, and of course in the defense of our ancestral land. and our territories. And so the burning question is, what should be done about these human rights or these violations against our rights and our rights to our ancestral domain? And that is why we are called defenders. And as defenders, we need to claim and solidly establish that fact to take on the front line in the defense of our ancestral domain for the preservation of our environment, our ecosystem, as people dwelling, inhabiting, and as stewards of the most of the world's biodiversity. And so as defenders, we need to rise up and fight back against these attacks or systematic attacks against our rights in our communities, whether it be in the legal arena, in legal engagement, parliamentary arena, and all other arenas that we can gain access to. So at this juncture, I would like to join everyone who are here in this activity, all the listeners, especially the youth, because as a youth, for every victory that the indigenous people struggle, it brings to life a seed of hope in us for a better world, as one of our speakers mentioned earlier. And so I would like to encourage everyone to keep participating in these kinds of discussions, to keep learning on how we can involve and how we can contribute in this advocacy, in this cause, for the benefit of everyone. And so for these coming months, like in November, don't forget to participate in this the lineup activities for the Indigenous Solidarity Month, to be led by the International ILPS Asia Pacific. So we'll be discussing more, or we'll be learning more about the different issues that are faced by other indigenous groups in India. And also, as a region and as an indigenous group that is facing an intensifying and systematic proliferation of smear campaigns and black propaganda against the legitimacy of our struggle as indigenous peoples or as Igorots here in the Cordillera in northern Philippines, we have also launched a campaign to widen and broaden the solidarity to support the struggle of indigenous peoples here in the Philippines, in the Cordillera, and other parts of the world, which is the Defend Cordillera campaign. So for this month, we'll be holding a series of webinars and activities every Saturday. So this coming Saturday, we're going to be holding a webinar, and we hope to see every one of you to learn more about share our common practices, and contribute also and share our solidarity for a stronger voice and a stronger force, and bring together our force, our strength to fight the plunders and exploitative initiatives of the imperialist groups. And so that is Defend Cordillera campaign. I hope to see everyone. We hope to see everyone and to hear solidarity, the expression of solidarity, whether through messages and through our with our campaign as well. That is all. And I thank the organizers for making this possible and for providing platform for these kinds of issues to be talked about, and for all the listeners who are able to participate in this activity. Thank you also. Thank you everyone. And long live the people's struggle for self-determination and liberation. Long live international solidarity.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Renz Kuyop from ILPS Commission 10 and from CPA. Wonderful energy coming from you. And it is at the time like this that the youth need to stand and be seen. The youth voices must be stronger from now on. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of us here on the Zoom platform to turn on our cameras, because we want to have a webinar photo and a symbolic show of unity for our brothers and sisters in Northeast India. So let me ask you to turn on your web camera or your cameras there, and we'll have a symbolic show of unity. And again, we hope to see you all again in our next series. So let's do that. Hands and fist in the air. Can I suggest that for all of us? And so I prompt our coordinators from IPMSDL to take photos of the various pages on our Zoom platform. I've been informed that we have 60 people on our Zoom platform right now. So keep posing. Keep your pose up. Okay. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for staying on to listen to this wonderful discussion. This webinar is brought to you by the International League of People's Struggle, ILPS Commission 10, Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, IPMSDL, the Center for Research and Advocacy of Manipur, the Youth Forum for Protection of Human Rights, the Minority Rights Group International, CASI Students Union, ILPS Commission 19, Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders, and Center for Environmental Concerns, CEC of Philippines. We have been broadcasting live on Facebook, on all our Facebook pages. My name is Mr. Atama Katama, your host for today, and we will see you again on the next round as we continue the discussion entitled Virus of Plunder, Northeast India in Defense of Land and Resources. I leave you now with long live international solidarity, long live indigenous peoples, fight for the rights of self-determination, down, down with imperialism. Till we see you again, Atama signing off.
Struggle for self-determination.
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 Makibaka.
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 Makibaka para sa sariling pagpapasya.
Makibaka para sa sariling pagpapasya.